Thank you all for coming out tonight, Monday, February 6, 2017, for the work session of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted to have you all here with us this evening. As you probably know, work sessions are open to the public, but we generally do not have public comment or public speakers. Those are for our regular meetings, which will be forthcoming. We'll have one next week. But we are happy that you're here with us this evening, and had a great town hall on Saturday. I'd like to thank Vice Mayor Conley in particular, but also Letty Hardy, the city manager, and all of the staff that put that together. Did a fantastic job. So our hats off to you. I know we'll be talking about that a little bit more later on this evening, but I wanted to start with a hearty thank you. Mr. Shields, do you want to go ahead and tee us up for the first item on the agenda?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. Just over a month ago, the council asked that we keep you up to date on our work with the FCC TV Cable Access Board, and so that's what tonight's briefing is. We do have a memo in your packet that just provides an update, and I'd like Cindy Mester just to speak to it. She has been working very diligently with the staff of the station, with the Cable Access Board, to try to work through issues. And really the approach is all these problems through dialogue and just through clarity, we think we can make good progress on them. And that's what we were trying to do. We also have the chairman of the Cable Access Board, Mr. Feldman, who is here tonight, and our treasurer, Richard Rankin, is here as well. So let me turn it over to Ms. Mester, and she will just provide you a brief update, and then we can take the discussion from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the memo, I did give a background going back to October when we started this process. After a December 8th full stakeholder group meeting of about 15 or 20 participants, we came to consensus after my interviews that really everybody was committed to the station being the best station it could be and a great community asset, and also realizing that the status quo is ineffective and can't continue. With that foundation, we then agreed to form a smaller working group, and so that has members from the Access Board, the general government, and schools. And on the general government side, it includes Susan Finarelli, Communications Director, and Genevieve Lames, who is one of the senior videographers. On the Access Board, it's Richard Rankin and Jerry Barrett. And for the schools, it is John Brett. And I will note also that the interim superintendent is in the audience, and he participated in the December 8th on behalf of the schools. And John's been tracking from that. We have actually had 3 meetings now with the working group since I did this memo. The February 2nd meeting has been held, and we've been working through the issues that are in the attachment, the tracking chart. And what I agreed to do was create this document. It has 19 issues that were identified either during the stakeholder interviews or the initial working group meeting. Excuse me, and the Access Board also provided an additional email, so we incorporated all that information into here. And then we're trying to track the outcome of the discussion. Sometimes it takes some follow-up, some tweaking of words, and then when we get to consensus, the last column will have hopefully a yes and not pending or in progress or no. And then each of the full stakeholders will reconvene as a full group and seek consensus on what the working group is recommending. The items in the attachment that are blue, that are labeled Access Board proposals, those were actually ones that were brought forth at the last meeting, and we worked through them, for example. So this document, because it went in your council packet before the last meeting, doesn't have all of the details from the last meeting. But we have worked through a lot of issues as we've gone through this, because sometimes working group members have knowledge that not everybody has. We've had some bumps in the roads with communication issues, and we've used the working group to come back and revisit those. And I believe through the last meeting we had reached consensus on things like hours, when the Access Board can come, when the students are there, what the training schedule will be. We set dates for training. We've clarified equipment checkout and better tracking So all of those things, I think, have made for better operations going forward. We just need to really implement them and live by them. We do have some big issues for the next meeting coming up, and those will be the discussion of public education and government grants, the PEG grants for their eligible uses under federal and state law, whether they're capital or operating, and whether they're public funds or not. But I've been pleased with the progress so far. It is slow, and it's not resolved yet, but I hope that by the end of February we can get to general consensus. We have agreed to reconvene the steering committee, which used to be the governing body, to work through these issues. And at the last meeting, we talked through what the roles and responsibilities and sort of what the meeting format and logistics would be. And one key thing that the working group has agreed to is that chairmanship would rotate. So everybody, Access Board, schools, and general government would take a month to be the chair, pull the agenda together, do the minutes, and so that everybody has buy-in and investment. And that was a recommendation from the Access Board. So that's a quick highlight of what we've been doing really since November, when I started the interviews, through the third working group meeting.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the efforts to try to resolve outstanding issues. I know that they are not resolved yet. I've spoken to Mr. Feltman, and I understand that there are some still continuing significant issues to be worked through. I imagine some of my colleagues may have had similar conversations. But I hope we are going to continue to make progress. It sounds like we are. But why don't we go ahead and open it up to some questions or comments, if there are any. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So I actually went back and looked at the original PEG agreement, and lo and behold, I signed it. So no comment there. So I got a couple questions. It looks to me like when you read the agreement, there are 3 equal parties, and the question is it really functioning like 3 equal parties? So that's a fundamental question, and what do we do to make sure that it functions that way? Secondly, the notion of programming, since it's not really, at least totally, a city enterprise, the question is, are producers able to come in and produce shows? Is that working the way it ought to? Are we encouraging maximum use of this incredible resource for everybody? And I think we want to make sure that we're offering some creative programs. So the question is, because there may be some citizens who have been denied the opportunity to produce, the question is what, why, and how do we move forward to maximize the most creativity and broadest use of the TV programming capability that we can. I mean, it's an incredible resource, and I think we all want to use it to the maximum extent. I mean, there are certain functions that the city has to perform, but I think there are a whole lot of hours where we want to encourage citizens to come in and use the facilities and be able to have certain intellectual property rights. I think that goes along with the creative process. So I think there's some questions there. I think there's some questions about various roles. Who is the coordinator? What are the various roles? City staff versus the cable corporation. Who does what, who's responsible for what, when, and are we making sure that we're really providing the kind of access that's implied in the name, as well as the potential resource for the use of the community. So those are some of the issues which I'd like answered. I don't want to prolong this discussion tonight, but there are questions and answers that have been brought to me, or questions that have been brought to me that I think are really fundamental to how we both assure the city's use for what it needs to do, but also maximizes the opportunity for creative use by the community. And I think in that way we get the most use of our combined investments. I guess that's kind of it. And are we really establishing a kind of, in addition to the structural issues, are we establishing a really productive and positive working relationship among the key principals involved, and how do we get there to assure that that's the case. So these are the kinds of things which I know the community is going to be looking for answers to, and I know that you're going to be looking for how best to proceed going forward. So those are the fundamental points that I wanted to put out on the table, and I'll be interested to look for a report on answering those fundamental questions
Certainly.
as you continue to meet. I know you've got a great reputation based on Tinner Hill of moving that project forward, so not to put too much on your shoulders, Cindy, but we're counting on you to produce
It
answers
is a
to
great
those
community
questions.
resource, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to really get to know all the players. The things that you just identified are the core of what we've been talking about for the first 3 meetings. So we really have worked on, and it's written in the tracking chart in a little more detail. It's not really a report yet, but we have allocated the hours of the station, so all 3 have the equal 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We have all acknowledged it can be flexible, so if something needed to happen, it could. We've blocked out the student times because by regulation, the access producers can't be there during that time. So we have, it's on page 1 of the tracking report in bold, times where the access board knows that time is reserved for them. They need other times, we can do it. Now, there's a lot of history, and I can't undo the
Falls
history.
Church, we have a lot of history
And
here.
so I have been working with, we start now, we know the issues, we move forward, and Ken has shared the Marine motto where you learn from the past, but you move forward, and so that's what I've been trying to work. So we've been trying to do how we allocate the hours, looking at the dollar amount. The PEG grants are divided 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but we have to talk about, as I said, the specific eligible uses for those. The city government is actually funding all the staff, so there's more financial commitment on the general government side of that. And the schools are doing phone, and we're about to do IT from the general government. We've looked at how to do training, and so they've revamped the training, and Genevieve was really helpful in working with Andy to propose redoing training, and we've set dates in February for field training, studio training, and editing, which will be what's needed to allow the volunteers to come in. There's a lot of history with past volunteers, and we're trying to message it's a new day going forward. I believe Genevieve and Andy are strongly committed to that and supported by Susan. And then redoing equipment and how to get freelance photographers. A lot of that we've talked about, and now we need to implement it. So that's a quick highlight into some of the core
Yeah.
things you've highlighted.
And I think it's both getting the structure right and making sure that the people are interacting the way that is most productive for everybody concerned. And then the actual, how you manage the staff is always a tough issue, and I think we need to look at that one as well as you go forward. So I'll look forward to a report back and wish you well. And I know that there are a number of us that are very interested in this issue. So thanks.
Vice Mayor Conley?
Cindy, I just want to say thank you because I think this history precedes even the employees that are there now and the cable access board that are there now. So as our cable access board has turned over, everyone keeps stepping into a situation that is undefined and changing. And so we have mounds and mounds and mounds of miscommunication and years of people that are trying to do the right thing but don't quite understand the big picture. So I appreciate that you're really taking a step back and looking at how we can do this better going forward. I think the training is awesome. And over the years, I know that I've seen training advertised here and there, but never consistently. So I would encourage, and again, I don't know who's in charge of the training, but whoever is, please make sure they promote it to the community in such a way that people will come and other people will know about it, and we can really get new people in as part of a new day.
That's a real partnership. The staff will conduct the training, and this is basic training, which is also something we clarified on the use of the station and the equipment. This isn't how to be an advanced producer or fancy editor, but it is so that people can come in and know how to use the equipment, the lighting, the green screen. The promotion is really important. We talked about that with Richard and Jerry at the working group, because this training is really to produce volunteers for the Access Board. So the Access Board needs to really help us, and we brainstorm things like VPIS and chambers and email listservs and all sorts of things. But it really is a partnership with the board. And we need a minimum of 4 people to pay the fee to cover the cost. So we've even gotten down to that level of logistics and details.
And can someone who takes one training then have access to the station? They have to do all 3 levels of training.
To some extent, it depends on their skill level and what they want to do. We also have the ability for somebody who already is experienced and worked in others, let's say Fairfax or Arlington, they can sort of pre-test out. They just need to know our equipment. So we've got that established. So they can do all 3, but my understanding is they don't have to do all 3. If they just want to do filming and not do the editing and somebody else, then they could focus on that. They could focus just on studio or film work. So it can be tailored, but if you want to do sort of from A to Z, then you would need all 3 to be able to do the editing
Okay.
and production. And under federal law and the franchise agreement, anything produced in the studio with PEG grants has to be for non-commercial uses and has to air on the station itself because it's being produced with PEG grants. And so we've also clarified that level of understanding as well.
Great. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I will not repeat the fine words said by others. I do appreciate, Cindy, your efforts and staff, and also the patience of the citizens. I know the process we're going through may seem a little bureaucratic at times, but some process is required, I think, and desired because of the past history of the station. And, my objective has always been to hope that we could find a blueprint for a way forward in time for inclusion in the manager's budget as far as resources allocated and management structure. So that's still what I'm hoping. I don't want to sound too happy-talkish, but I do hope that we can keep moving on the path that we've laid out here and get something in place by the springtime. Thanks.
Ms. Hardy?
I had 2 specific questions based on, I think a couple months ago during public comment, someone had shared a concern that old school board meeting recordings had disappeared. Has that been since resolved?
That has been resolved, and we have responded, Susan responded directly to the citizen, and then this week forwarded the information to the Access Board. It wasn't that things were missing, it was just reorganized, and so school board meetings are on the school board website, general government on the general government, and Access Board on the TV, and so she just had an old link, and it didn't connect her, so we provided the links.
Okay. And then the most recent request, there was an issue with, I guess, the MLK panel. Has that been also resolved as well?
For the MLK panel in terms of the editing?
I just haven't followed the issues on what needs to be done, but I wanted to make sure that we had followed up on that. And
yeah, we worked out, for part of the filming, we worked it out just before the filming in terms of Access Board paying for the freelancers for the March part and the general government filming what happened in chambers. And then the editing of it, the Access Board is paying to have that edited and merged together, although the general government did a standalone panel. And then there was a subsequent question if a panel member could have access to the recordings to make their own resource, and Susan has followed up with that and provided them the 2 options on how to follow up on that. So I believe that they've been addressed. It was bumpy in the process, and it was a good test on working through past miscommunications and better communications going forward, but I believe as of the last working group meeting, we had talked through everything.
thank you, Cindy.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
Sorry, I have one more question, and maybe this one could be for Mr. Feltman, but also at the meeting, Mr. Feltman was talking about 12 access producers that had been alienated and weren't able to produce anymore, and I'm wondering if there's outreach to bring them back, or they're gone forever? Do we know?
I have talked to Mr. Feltman several times about that. In terms of the training, part of the opportunity that Richard and Jerry talked about is reaching out to those that were interested in training. One board member had indicated they had 4, so we could try to bring them back in. I have offered to interview those 12 members or any that wanted to as part of my stakeholders. They have elected not to do that, and so I'm just dependent on with going forward to change it, and that the message can get out. And if the Access Board will have them come back or want me to talk to them, then I can do that. But
So if we lost 12 producers, then did we lose 12 TV shows too? How does that work?
no, we have, to my knowledge, we have not lost 12 TV shows. I think these were ones that were wanting to produce new shows, and one or two had done some in the past, and they're not doing new ones because they're not involved. I know of, I think, in the conversations about 4 names, but I don't know all 12. So any more details, I'd have to defer to the Access Board for who left. But my offer still holds, as Ken knows, that if they choose to, I'm glad to talk to them, but some have elected, because of the past history, not to do that.
It would just be great to know what it was that was so difficult.
I hope through the other interviews, I'm aware of the issues, and we can solve it going forward and have the door open for people to come back or new folks to be involved.
Okay. Anything else?
So just to sort of tie things up, are you working under the assumption that we're really dealing with an agreement between 3 co-equal parties?
Yes, I am.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. Look forward to working with you.
Okay. Ms. Oliver?
I just want to say that I, as I look through these notes, I realize how detailed these meetings are, and I'm grateful that the working group is willing to come together and work on this, and that it looks like there's some real effort to solve problems, and that's what I hope we continue to see going forward.
Okay. Yeah, I'd echo that. Let's get this resolved. Whatever's outstanding, let's bang it out. I know we're capable of solving these problems, and let's go ahead and get it done. Thank you for that information and that work. Let's move on to the next item then, the mid-year financial report. Mr. Shields?
And I would note, Cindy's going upstairs now to present the capital improvements program to the Planning Commission. And,
To solve yet another issue, right? Good luck.
Thank you, Cindy. So we have in your packets the second quarter financial report, and Melissa Ryman will give you a summary of those. I'd be happy to answer any questions about them. And obviously, we are in the process of putting together the FY18 budget, and so we always have a mind at this second quarter financial report about what it means in terms of our revenue forecasts for the coming year, and any other pieces of information that it can be that are helpful to us in understanding what next year might look like. But let me turn it over to Melissa.
Good evening, Council. As Wyatt said, before you is the second quarter financial report, and I'll just go over some quick observations we've had for the second quarter. Through the second quarter, we are slightly above target. I'll just caution that to also mention there are a few revenue items that we are looking at very closely for the rest of the year. Just wanted to point out real property taxes are currently falling below target, and pretty much due to abatements that have been made that were in excess of our projections for fiscal year 2017. And these abatements include property tax relief, some just assessment corrections to some properties, the rehab credit, and things like that. The other thing that we're closely watching is the licenses and permits. In FY17, we had anticipated some big projects, some revenues from big projects to come in this fiscal year. Through the second quarter of this fiscal year, those revenues have not come in yet. And so we are looking at that and really working with the developer to understand when that might come on board. The other main thing that we are looking at is it's the personal property taxes, which on the bright side is coming in more than we had anticipated at 11.2% over budget. So we're going to see if that actually transpires to real revenue of over $550,000 over budget for the next for this fiscal year. On the expenditure side, we are starting to look at those, and we are working with departments to determine why they're a little bit ahead of target, and to see if there's anything that we can do to assist them in the next 6 months or 5 months, as it is, in order to correct that.
Sorry, you're done. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's good. I know we have a question, so I won't ask if we have questions. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Ms. Ryman, for joining us. A question on the real estate property taxes. I think you mentioned that the main reason for the departure from where we were expected to be at budget, I think it was $300,000 more in adjustments than what we budgeted for.
Right.
And where those you mentioned were tax relief, assessment corrections, and rehab credits. Could you go
Right.
into a little more detail on what those were? Is it the senior and tax relief program?
Right. So the tax relief program includes the senior relief, as well as the military killed in action. I'm sorry. Spouses relief, and the rehabilitation credit. That's the commercial rehabilitation credit, and we have, I think, about 5 commercial properties that are currently.
That's the new one that we just adopted?
No, this is the old program.
okay.
Yes. The deferrals are also part of the property tax relief that we have for seniors. That is when we allow them to pay those at the time that they sell their properties. And the other, there are some also that we had to adjust their assessed values due to new information that we've obtained since then. And those are mostly commercials where there is typically some estimation that we do during assessment, because we don't have all the information that are needed to provide an accurate assessment.
What I'm trying to also understand is, are these kind of one-time kind of issues, or things that we should keep an eye on? So, for example, as we look at kind of future budgets and potentially, pressure on the tax rate.
We are definitely.
You probably will see more requests for tax relief, for example.
We are definitely keeping an eye out for these, and we are adjusting in our FY 2018 budget formulation. We are making some adjustments based on what we know now, as far as these deferrals that we're seeing, and abatements and deferrals that we're seeing.
And then if we roll out more marketing of the commercial, like rehab credit and the other program that we rolled out, whether we'll see increased usage of that, which hopefully should be good news as well on the flip side.
Yeah, it is with the changes to the commercial abatement program. There's a higher threshold you have to clear to get it, but potentially more value that you could get if you clear that higher threshold. So we'll have to see how it goes. We do not have any current applications under the new program yet.
Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Z and then Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. My questions are twofold. They go to the license and permits, and then the BPOL, which are two of the largest lagging indicators here. Now, I think I understand how you arrived at a minus 35 underrun in license and permits, and perhaps you could share with us how the license and permits doesn't meet the algorithm that the city uses to achieve a level revenue stream. And then secondly, if you could just talk about the BPOL, which is minus 20, and it's both these are significant chunks, and in particular BPOL at $4.2 million. You've stated that you expect the revenue stream to get well in March. So are we to expect that every January that we would have a lagging BPOL license receipts, or perhaps you could just explain how this works?
Sure. Let me talk about the BPOL process. The BPOL process, we do have, as you know, the reporting for that revenue comes in March or around that time frame. And so we don't actually get the bulk of our BPOL revenues, and we don't know how much they will be exactly until March or April timeframe once we process all those returns. During the preceding months, however, we do receive some minimal amount of revenues from people who may be just starting a business. They would have to pay sort of an advance on their estimated gross receipts in order to get a license. So these revenues that we've received through December would be those who have just started a business, opened a business, and are filing anew. Or we do also have some smaller businesses who prefer to pay a quarterly tax fee return rather than all at once in March. So this is why it's coming in through December or the second quarter of the fiscal year. Those first few months are really not very indicative of what we might see for the remainder of the fiscal year.
Do you have offhand available in front of you how many entities file for BPOL in our city?
No, I don't have that information, but I can find that out.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Snyder?
I think there was a
Second question about
second
the
question,
permits.
and it is about the permits. And please correct me or remind me if I'm not answering the question to your satisfaction. But we have included over the past few years a revenue for these big projects that do come in once in a while, and they've come in pretty regularly over the last several years. Besides from our day in and day out kind of permits revenue, people who are doing renovations, adding a little something, that counts for about $500,000 to $600,000 a year. And then on top of that, we have this big developments that come in and apply for permits. We have counted on that revenue in our budgeting process, and that is something that we will be tackling in fiscal year 2018 as far as weaning ourselves from reliance on these sort of one-time revenues, so that we're not, from year one to year two, we're not scrambling for these monies when they're not available anymore. That is also one reason why we established the Building Reserve Fund. It currently has a balance of about $900,000 in the hopes that when things do slow down, there will be some funds available to kind of tide us over until things pick up back again. We do have employees that we are paying for with these Building Reserve Funds, and I don't. So the preference would be to keep them on while there's a lull, and so we have the experienced employees ready to work when there is actual activity.
And that really does get to my question with your indulgence. So you've got $900,000, and how much erosion would you expect that we would see until new funds come in to replenish based on, again, your algorithm for when you might expect new applications?
For fiscal year 2017, I'm not exactly sure how much we're going to be drawing down on that. Probably we'll be looking to see how much of the revenues that we had expected actually do come in. There's still some expectation of a little bit of that coming in this year, but not to the extent that we had anticipated. Should we provide an estimate?
Yeah, when we were talking about this with the Budget and Finance Committee, this is a potential exposure of about $600,000 this year, we think. If you're, what the permits team provides us is a spreadsheet of what the anticipated fees will be on every project that is going through the pipeline, whether it's Inns of Virginia, Mason Row, or other projects. And so there's an anticipation of when they think they will come in. And then we look at that on a regular basis, and you push it out if things aren't proceeding according to the original time frame. So Mason Rose, just as an example, those are really big permit numbers. And so it's about a total of $900,000 for their first two big permits that they get. If they apply for those in May, that's going to significantly reduce the shortfall this year. If they apply for them in July, we'll have a shortfall this year, but then we will have revenues in FY18. So as we're doing our FY18 budget numbers right now, this is just a big swing, and it's a kind of a tricky thing to wrestle with because it's pennies on the tax rate depending on how you treat it. But I think it is really good that the council set aside those excess fees when Lincoln and 301 West Broad were coming through to help smooth these big spikes out. And so that gives us help this year. But we have to be very careful about it. If we use too much of it this year and then say a big project just doesn't proceed at all, then you've got big exposure in FY18. So that's what we'll be working through and try to be clear about that as so the council has good transparency as to how we're proposing to treat it in the FY18 budget.
So just one last question on that. How many FTEs does that translate into if you're going to spend the $600,000?
Well, we'd probably need to get back with you on that number. What we have in the permits department right now is we had 3 and we now have 5. So in terms of the increasing, sort of the plussing up of staff to deal with the big projects, that's the staffing increase that we made.
Thank you.
In terms of plan review and inspections, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Snyder, then Ms. Oliver, then Ms. Hardy. Then we'll go around the side
I'll
of the
defer to
table.
the chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee.
I just wanted to follow up and ask, when we're preparing the budget for next year, can we just not count on Mason Row money? And if it comes in next year instead of this year, we just put it back in those reserves that we're going to have to draw from this year?
If you say that again.
So we'll be approving the budget in April, and we won't yet know what the situation is with Mason Row.
Right.
But even if at that time you believe that Mason Row will actually come in the next fiscal year, can we please not count on that revenue in the next fiscal year? Because then this fiscal year we'll have to draw from the reserves. Could we just not put that money back into reserves?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think we would want to recharge the reserves, at least to some extent. I think we're going to have to work through as we go along with our best view as to what numbers we should use. If we were to take all of Mason Row out of FY18, that is a huge change to the budget. And what we would propose instead is to try to sort of gradually wean ourselves off of the big project building permit fees so that we have less exposure to it than we have in the current fiscal year. But I think that could be a multi-year process because we do have the reserve. If it's done all in 1 year, that's a major correction that has big implications throughout the budget. But
Okay, I think when you present the budget for next year, though, you need to be very explicit about what your assumptions are on these significant fees and what your assumptions are on the reserves. Because I don't want to take money out of reserves this year and not replenish it if it's just shifting the money from one fiscal year to the other. Because that feels like double counting.
Okay, Mr. Snyder?
I was expecting to hear Happy Monday, Council. And,
that's right, we forgot.
so,
I apologize for
That's
that. I will
okay.
try to remember that.
Thank you for your good work. So one thing that would be helpful for me as we look at this is how are other jurisdictions doing in the region, and are we seeing something that's unique to us or something that's sort of being tracked region-wide? And I don't want to take you away from your, the analysis that you have to do specifically for us, but Wyatt, if you can get a hold of any sort of other information so we can begin to track, are we seeing trends here that go beyond the city? other jurisdictions performing much better than we are? The question is why, so that we can adjust our policies accordingly. And I guess one of the bottom lines here is to urge our citizens to buy a lot of cars and eat in a lot of restaurants, right? Because both of those are doing pretty well. So,
Dan's done his job, I think.
yeah. So, but yeah, I would be interested in what we're learning from this, not only in the numbers and our immediate budget impact, but what are other jurisdictions doing, and can we learn some things from them to sort of be able to buttress some of these revenue areas. So thanks much for your work.
Ms. Hardy.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I realized I had two more questions. Well, I saw that while sales tax was slightly lower than what we budgeted, we're actually 9% higher than last year. And so given that Harris Teeter opened now 6 months ago, are we attributing that 9% growth over last year to Harris Teeter or a bunch of other factors? What's our sense on that?
I don't actually have information towards that matter. It's the sales tax revenues derived from each company in particular is a protected, or
although
it's
we do have
proprietary.
The Economic Development Office has been tracking it because they really wanted to try to understand to what extent might Harris Teeter be pulling from other merchants in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's really important for us for understanding. Might be great here, but it's actually just taking from the Giant or from CVS or from other businesses in the city. What I think is pretty good news, and it relates back to Mr. Snyder's question, what's happening in the region. The sales tax growth, 9.25% above actual last year, is strong compared to the region, quite strong compared to the region. Most of our peers are recording pretty flat activity on the. Actually, let me correct that. They're reporting like 4 to 5% increase on the retail growth side. So there is actually some basic economic more spending happening regionally, but no one is at the 9.25% rate. We had budgeted, I think, 11.5 or something like that.
11%, yes.
So a part of that is the Fresh Market not coming online, and so that's it. I think we can see some of that in the numbers as well.
And then my second question is, while we've got Dr. Schiller here as well, I think some of us heard that there's a potential solution for the George Mason roof repair that was going to be in the order of $100,000 or so, which was much smaller than previous estimates that we had gotten, which is always good news. But while we're talking about budget and next year, I wanted to confirm that that was also going to be something that was going to be taken care of in this year's operating budget, and we wouldn't need to amend the budget in any way or add additional CIP funds. So I figured while we had him here, it would be a good time to confirm.
Yes. We will be able to, so long as our expenditures remain constant as projected up to today, we would be able to gather up some funds that we have in the budget that we've scoured through and project with those funds later this spring.
Great. That's great news. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Could I go back to the first bullet on the first page, just so that I understand about real estate tax receipts? So I can hear what you're saying about maybe some more costs involved in the rehabilitation credit or tax relief and deferrals, but this is not to suggest in any way that assessments for commercial and residential real estate are in the city or anything other than up, and probably fairly significantly up, right? I mean, a citizen handed me a card the other day showing the home sales in the last 30 days, and I think the average sale price was about 14% over the average assessed price. I know when the GovOps committee had the assessor in, we had a good discussion about the mass appraisal method and all that, but we do keep an eye on trends in sales month to month and so forth. I mean, just want to make sure that everybody in the public understands that their houses are selling for more, and assessments are likely to be up when we draft the next budget, right? I mean, this is, if there's any assessment corrections that are being made, I guess that are significant, I guess maybe I'd like a better understanding of what that would be, and if there are corrections on the lower revenue side, then, you know, can we have some corrections on the upper side too? Because I think it's pretty customary that assessments here are below sales prices are above assessed prices.
Now, other than the abatements for tax relief, most of the abatements or assessment corrections that we've done have been on the commercial side and not on the residential side. There's few and far between on the residential side. And mostly, and you know, these are because of information that are not available to us at the time of assessment. We make our assessments based on estimated revenues or of that commercial entity, and if they don't provide us with their revenue and expense statements for that calendar year, we can only assume what it might be based on the previous calendar years. And so sometimes the commercial entity will see their assessment and determine that it is higher than what it should be, and they'd come for an appeal. And based on that, we would have to make an adjustment because of the new information.
That's helpful to know. Do we also, I mean, when a commercial property changes hands, so there's a sale price on the books, I presume that our assessment aligns itself with that sales price. Is that more or less? I mean, within you know, the 90 or 90%, 95% confidence level that the assessor talks about?
I'll probably have to have the assessor respond to that, but as from my understanding, commercial properties are a little bit, well, when you have a business valuation with a business sale, that probably does affect the assessment a little bit, but I will really have to defer to the assessor for that question.
Okay, well, the Vice Mayor, in her able leadership of the GovOps Committee, as I say, had the assessor in. It's been probably, I don't know, 6 months or so ago. Maybe at some point it might be, wow, time flies when you're having fun. Well, in some setting or format, maybe it would be helpful to get a little more information on that, just so everybody understands that real estate assessments, tax receipts are likely to be up, and probably significantly up. My other question is, and it's just the right time to ask it. I mean, so it is February. Is this, do I recall, is this the Happy Monday meeting where we usually try to get some idea what this information means relative to the budget guidance that we give the city and school side? As the budget committee talked about this, I'm sorry, I think I might have been out of town when the budget committee meeting was last held. Is this the time where we, you know, a puff of smoke comes out of a...
You want to update the budget guidance that we approved previously?
This year's information, you know, what the percentage is, where things are standing now relative to the budget that the schools are developing and the budget that the manager is going to develop.
Well, in terms of the revenue forecast, they're very much aligned with what the December 5th numbers were, or they're almost exactly aligned with that.
Okay.
And I think we're thinking, in terms of revenue growth overall, I think at the, on the December 5th meeting, we said 2.5% to 3.5%. So we work with 3% growth, and that's going to be very close to where we end up. Probably maybe just a notch below that at 2.9 or something like that.
Okay, so I just recall through the last process that some folks were unclear what the number was and when it was stated, and I thought it was pretty clear last time. It was on a PowerPoint that you handed out in the previous year's budget cycle. So again, you're pretty well where you were at in early December in terms of numbers that you are expecting to hit, and numbers that we expect or hope that the school board will hit in drafting their budget. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments, when will we get our next update from you all? When's the next update?
March 15th.
Okay, sounds good.
Wait, that's not the end of the quarter. It would be after
I was
March.
talking about budget presentation.
Oh, okay.
We're just right around the corner.
Yeah, it's coming up soon. And we're working very hard on the budget. We still have a lot of things up in the air, but they'll start to congeal. And we do plan to give the Budget and Finance Committee a briefing before presentation, just in terms of what the major issues are. And that'll be in late February, and we'll communicate that out to the whole council also. I think the goal would be to avoid any surprises in terms of the budget on the 15th, so you understand what the main issues are that we're wrestling with and how we think we're probably going to solve them.
Mr. Shields, since we did not get the committees on the council schedule, can
That's right.
you please, A, do that for Wednesday's meeting, and then 2, can you specifically send a note out to the Budget and Finance Committee with a copy to the rest of council on the date of the Budget and Finance Committee meeting?
Right.
Something else? Okay, anything else? Any last words? Okay, thank you for.
We do have another financial matter, and so we do have in your packet a proposed budget amendment that we'd like to hopefully get done before we present the FY18 budget in March, so that the decks are cleared for that. And the main thing to discuss, I would suggest, is the campus planning effort. But before we get to that, we have a number of other items that are really in the nature of appropriating a voluntary concession from the Lincoln project and transferring projects between capital projects or deallocating funds from the CIP because of grants that we did not receive. We can go through those in detail in terms of those other items that I just briefly mentioned, or I could just see if you have any questions about those.
Why don't you see if we have any questions about those? Looks like we already have one. Ms. Hardy?
Thanks. I did have questions about the ones with the grants denied. So I thought it was the downtown project and the WNOD park plan.
That's correct.
Were those the major sources of funding we were banking on to get those projects underway, or do we have other ones that are pending?
Those are the major sources of grants that we are banking on to get those projects underway.
So I read that for both of those, we're hoping to keep still some money in there that we're funding ourselves to keep some
That's
parts of the project
correct.
going?
These grants had local matches that were required, and so staff is requesting that those be kept in these projects so that they can make some headway towards making some improvements.
And the local money was principally NVTA 30% funds.
That is correct.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
So on those grants, is there an expectation? Do we know why we didn't get them? Are we reapplying? Are we looking at it differently to move forward, or are we going to have to locally fund
Right.
these projects?
Staff is currently talking to the grantors to see what they could do better in the grant application process, and it's certainly not something that it's certainly something that they will be pursuing later as well when the new grant year opens up.
Okay, unless there are other questions, why don't we go on to the campus? Oh, there are other questions.
On the item of the transfer of the funds from the Bridges program, I understand the need for the sidewalk program. I guess my question is, can we really afford to take the money out of the bridges?
The goal ultimately is to restore the funding to the bridge project. It was behind in terms of the queue relative to that Roosevelt sidewalk project, so in order to keep that project moving forward, that's the reason why for the sequencing of those, but our intent is in FY18 to try to backfill and identify additional funds for that bridge program, the Oak Street Bridge in particular.
That is correct. There are sources of funding that are coming on board in FY18, 19, and further down the road, and staff is going to look at those to appropriate towards the Bridges project program.
Okay. why don't we go on into the campus issue?
So the campus item, and just in terms of the numbers, I can distribute these around the table. Over the past 4 fiscal years, the council has set aside $500,000 for the campus planning effort. And so this effort, if you go back into 2014, we did the ULI TAP. That $500,000 was used for that. It was done for the initial space fit analysis that RTKL performed, and it was used, the Cooper Carey contract was used to do the initial visioning process for the school program. In addition, when we received the unsolicited proposal for the campus development, and then that ultimately turned into a decision to issue an RFP, we incurred costs, legal costs, financial analysis, commercial real estate advising, and other charges, advertising for the RFP and things like that, for a total of just over $500,000 as part of that process. And then since that RFP was issued, if you tally up the invoices we received to date from Arcadis for their cost estimating and the full contract costs, getting the Link Strategic Partners really through early February, those costs are included there, in total $92,000. So we've spent $675,000, or just a little bit over that, to date over the 4-year period. What is before the council is a proposal to allocate an additional $500,000, which, if that was acted on, would leave $325,000 for the next steps in the process. We do have Dr. Schiller here. One way to adjust whether that is the right number or whether that appropriation is necessary or appropriate right now, it might be useful to have a discussion about the session that we had on Saturday, what your impressions on that were, and whether that informs any of your thinking in terms of what you think we'll need as part of our planning process as we go forward. We'd like to have that discussion with you. There's a meeting of the school board tomorrow night, and then I think from those discussions, staff could put together a more detailed budget and proposal for you. What this number represents of the $500,000 allocation obviously is just a round number that would give us some runway, but we can be, I think with more work, we could be more precise in terms of what our expectations are and have a more precise number as well.
Mr. C.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the session on Saturday, and I was, quite frankly, amazed by the attendance. It was much more than I expected. But at the outset, I saw a large number of staff facilitating and working on working the room and engaging quite well with the community, and so it's really heartening to see our city and the staff just come out and just throw themselves, their heart and their effort into this. And I really do want to thank Mary Beth Conley for such great leadership and you know, just not quite sure as I wouldn't call it exactly a pep rally kind of speech, but it was all upbeat, which is a good way of presenting these difficult issues. I don't know what you've done with those rocks that you presented, but I've got a garden that you could put them in if you run out of places. So, and everyone that showed up, in particular the citizenry, just not the sheer number itself, but which was huge. But the kind of people, I would expect the school population to show up. Of course, they have a big stake in this, but for all those people that I know no longer have children in the school system but care about the future of the city and what the school means to them, I think is a hallmark of who we are as a city, that we had so much engagement. So with that said, I know that we were planning to kick off the small area plan effort, and so maybe it's kind of a soft start. But that's not reflected in here. I know that Jim Schneider is planning to engage the services of an urban design company in Alexandria. I spoke at length with one of the principals, and so maybe you could spend some time discussing that adjunct here, because it's not just about the school. The campus is that whole area up there. So if there's some additional expenses, I would like you to talk about that. Also, the money for Arcadis. Now that's these two line items here, I assume, are above and beyond the $375K that Arcadis gets a year for all the stuff that they do for the school system. They have been doing that for quite a while. So, and I would like you to confirm that, whether these are amounts above and beyond what they get as regular courts. And in fact, if there are other kinds of ongoing budgetary items that the school system engages, I would like to have that reflected here as well, with regard to building matters, assessments, those kind of things.
Ms. Oliver.
So, Mr. Shields, in order to answer your question, the thing that I think would be most helpful is to understand from this body and also from the school board tomorrow night is whether we are ready now to make a decision about a general path that we're going to follow, for which we need specific kinds of information, hiring an architect, doing an RFP for the PPA process, you know, whatever that path is. Are we at a point that we are ready to make a decision, and so we can define what the amounts are for those two alternative paths that you have presented in the past? That's question one. Question two is, if we're not, you know, what is the additional information that we need, and what will it cost us to get it, so that we can reach a decision point? And that's, I'm asking my colleagues and asking the school board. And then I think the third thing beyond that, or as a part of that, is that if we are at a decision point and we have a sense for what the land that will potentially be free is, what is the additional planning funds that we need? You know, so it's all predicated on the first part, which is, are we as two bodies ready to take a decision, or are we still in a preliminary information gathering stage? And I don't know where people are after that meeting. I've heard people who stated there was a lot more information they needed to make a decision, and I know there are some people who are ready to take a decision.
Well, one thing I'll just jump in with, in terms of the small area planning, we have Saturday's meeting was initially supposed to be the kickoff for the small area planning work. And as council will recall, we've received 2 grants to help pay for the urban design team that Councilmember Z referenced, Nelson Nygaard, and then a transportation consultant to carry out a TLC grant that we got. We think that the small area planning on that track, really with a working group of the EDA and Planning Commission, really to work through these economic development numbers and scenarios and preferred uses, we believe that that can happen regardless of what the decision is on the school procurement side. And I would say that the decision, sort of in its simplest term on the school side, is, are we going to hire an architect to master plan the site because we want to do some renovation and possibly some phasing, or would we instead task staff to develop an RFP for a design competition and for a one-phase project that will have economic development with it? And that developing that RFP will be a very involved process to get that scoped correctly. that's sort of I think that's the decision that's before the council and the school board. And so that would drive how much money we would need to support one versus the other.
So maybe you can, based on what you just said, develop pros and cons for each path. In other words, okay, if we do this path, this is the good news. It's a fixed cost, or the risk shifts to the design build outfit. This path, we have more control. So that's your suggestion for a decision point. We're going to need information, if that is in fact the decision point, on which to base the decision. And I'm not sure we as a group have information. If that's a critical decision that needs to be had, I think you ought to go ahead and prepare as much information on it, pros and cons on both paths, so that we can contemplate that at our next meeting, our next joint meeting.
Are you talking about the pros and cons of just this next little tiny step, or the pros and cons of the whole?
No, well, but why I was just discussing the idea of hiring an architect, for example.
Right, but we would only do that if we went with option 2. So
I'm not
if-
sure that's the case. Is that
Yeah.
the case, Mr. Shields? So in any of the other options, we would not hire an architect?
No, if we go with option 1, we don't even have any need to do an area plan because there's no development at all. So that would
Sure,
come
that's
off.
the case. I mean, if
Yes?
there's no,
The way we presented it, yeah, the renovation has no economic development.
no, I got that part, but we'd still need to hire an architect.
Yes, so that would be to hire an architect really for the school program.
Right,
For the
but we
school
wouldn't
program.
have to spend any money on the small area plan because there'd be nothing to,
No, of course, I'm not
Plan,
talking about the
right?
small area plan,
Okay.
but I thought, were you just speaking only as to the small area plan, or were you talking about hiring an architect versus just putting out as design build? And wasn't that what you were just saying was the decision point?
No, the decision point is which of the options we're choosing, and that determines what step we take, whether we hire an architect or we do the design build.
Is that what you're suggesting?
So in terms of Saturday's presentation, option 1 or option 2 means what you do is you hire an architect to do your master planning. Option 3, you put together an RFP for the design competition, and at the end of that, you have procure a builder to build you your new high school. Meanwhile, on all the tracks, you're doing your small area planning for the economic development.
And maybe I'm a little confused, and I don't have to have total clarity, but you're suggesting that an architect quote is only needed for the economic development side. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm saying the architect is really at the service of the school program. We're doing the urban planning with the consultants we've already procured through the grants that we have.
Okay, I mean, I think the bottom line is there's uncertainty as to what consultants we're going to need. And that could be because we don't have enough information. We obviously haven't made a decision yet either. So, I mean, I guess with getting back to the decision before us now is how much money we're going to allocate towards this. Personally, I'm not comfortable just doing a blanket $500,000. We spent a whole lot of money, taxpayer money, to date, and that's water under the bridge. But I think we need to make sure we get our arms around what the plan is, what things are going to cost. I'd like to see a run rate, in other words, what we're spending on per month. I think some of these costs, people probably weren't widely aware that they were being spent on a regular basis. And so I think it'd be nice to have some kind of monthly update as to what we're spending right now, and then then your suggestion on what we might be spending going forward, so that we can have further discussion about this. Ms. Oliver?
So, Dave, I think that if we step back, the fundamental decision in order for Wyatt to give you the information you want is that we as two bodies need to pick a path. We need to pick the renovation or phasing, or we need to pick the build new. Because in order to get more information to proceed with any of those and to proceed beyond the grants we already have for economic development, we need to know as a body which way we're proceeding. Or if we're not ready to make that decision, then we need to figure out what the additional information we need is so that Wyatt can cost that out. So
That's true. I agree with that. However, there may be expenses you're contemplating spending irrespective of which route, and I don't know if there are or not, but I imagine there may be some. And those would be good to know as well. In other words, irrespective of what path we choose, there are certain costs that we will likely be spending either way. And I don't know if there are any costs. I would think there probably are. But if you could give us those as well.
So yes, that also goes back to I think the unspoken question here is, are we what's being proposed here, if I'm hearing the question being asked correctly, is that we're truncating the Link strategic partner process. We have yet to come to that major piece where we reconcile what we as a city want as a program for the entire site and campus, and including the schools. And a lot of that was articulated on Saturday by Michael Novotny when he talked about shared facilities, shared library, pool facilities, field house, a whole variety of things that I think have yet to be discussed. And so I would think that we need to have that time to deliberate on what it is that we want as a city, not just what the school desires to move forward and build a new school one way or another. I think this is a much larger discussion, and it just obviously informs that any decision we make on the outcomes of the rest of the campus, because it shapes how we build that. So I guess for me, I'm answering two questions from my perspective. One, are we ready to make a decision? I don't think that I'm in any frame of mind to truncate and terminate the Link strategic process, where we have yet to come to major statements of principles that with regard to benefit as well as cost to the city and the school, and how they can work together. And of course, the other one is what the timeline would be to come to that kind of agreement. So I do agree. That was with the mayor. That was primarily my first question here. What is that we spent? What other kinds of money are we spending? And of course, I hadn't even considered that we might be burning money even as we speak on various things. So I would like to have that information as well.
Ms. Hardy?
So going back to your question of, are we ready to allocate the $500,000 for the next phase of the project? I think it kind of depends on when we're ready to make the decision on the paths. Based on the November 2017 referendum, when do we need to make a decision? Because I thought it would be pretty soon in order to stay on that timeline, correct?
It does. In some respects, you could, depends on how thorough you want the information to be for the community by July when you authorize the referendum. If there's a tolerance for still things to unfold and evolve after you've agreed to the language of the referendum, we've got a little bit more runway. But right now, it's thinking of how you would frame up your referendum question with an actual dollar amount for your school program by July. That to do ideally what you do, if it were the one phase build new, you would issue that RFP so that you have bids back and you have a top ranked respondent by the time you authorize that referendum question with a guaranteed maximum price. That's getting tight already.
I mean, this is complex, so I don't want to rush the decision, but on the other hand, while we're all kind of staring at these numbers and they're scary, I think the other scary numbers out there is the ongoing maintenance costs. Every time we get new estimates for construction prices, they keep going up every year. And so I think I personally would love to see us still hit the November date because of those numbers that we also see that aren't on this chart. So I think it's important to keep in mind kind of what the overall timeline is and whether November is realistic or not.
We can also reallocate money. I mean, in other words, we don't have to do it in one fell swoop. We can say, here's $100,000 and come back to us and we'll give you another $100,000. I mean, I like that idea more because I think we have a closer eye to the expenses that are being spent. And that appeals to me because I think we really ought to have tight control over the amount of money we spend on this endeavor because we've already spent a pretty good amount of money. We'll be arguing over much less when it comes to budget time, I'm sure. And so I want to make sure that we're good stewards of taxpayer money. On a related matter as well, and I've mentioned this at our last joint meeting, I really think we ought to give some thought to some kind of economic development working group to really spend some time in detail on economic development at this site, how it might work, how it might contribute to the school program or the school cost, because I think that'll inform our decision as well. And it may influence people's decision whether they want economic development. And so I think the time is near when it would be a good idea to get the EDA, Planning Commission, some folks from City Council, maybe some others as well, to really sit down and really focus in on what kind of economic development we'd like to see there. How would that fit with the school program? What kind of tax revenue and other revenue would it generate? And how can that fit into the program and what we might want to do on the school side? So I will offer that up again.
I was going to say, I think that idea is a really good idea, and that can work in parallel with our decision that we're making on the school, because they all are so intrinsically tied. So I don't think we need to stop the school program discussion while we figure out what the economic development is going to be. I think they both need to be moving along those same quick tracks, and I really would like to be able to see us do a November referendum. I think we've gathered a lot of facts with this process, and Saturday was a really good opportunity to gather even more. And I think the presentations that Mr. Shields and Dr. Schiller made and Mr. Novotny were really compelling to people in the community to be able to grapple with what we've all been grappling with for so long. There were a lot of people there who hadn't been paying attention, who really felt like they understood the big picture by the end of that meeting. So I think we're very close to being able to make a decision, and but how that plays out in this budget, I'm not sure. I don't know if we need that much money right now. I think we need to pay the debts that we have and then allocate a little bit more, and then be ready to make that decision and see where we need to put the money towards an architect or towards an RFP.
Mr. I don't know who's first.
I just wanted to ask, since I wasn't able to be there, but thanks to those who did filming, I was able to catch bits and pieces of it online. One question that I wondered if it was addressed was some information that came to us, I think, from Jeff Anderson about per square foot, discrepancies, differences between the costs that are projected for our facilities, whichever path we choose, renovate or phased rebuild or build new, and the per square foot costs associated with area schools. Was there any further information about that, any explanation? And if not, is that the sort of thing that we would be spending money to help get information from consultants on? I mean, I obviously I'm supportive of a November referendum. It seems like the only thing that's likely to shut off the perpetual cash machine that goes out to consultants, which we've asked them to spend it, and it's all in service to making us feel comfortable with whatever we decide. But that piece of information seemed kind of glaring to me, like our numbers are north of 300 per square foot, and numbers of similar builds in the area were more than $100 less than that, and that seemed like a piece of information that he's either wrong or he's right, and if he's right, then how come? And it's related to the nature of the school program, but it's not driven by the school program. I mean, it just seemed to be the difference in cost between buildings in other jurisdictions and this building.
So, Mr. Schiller, do you have any thoughts on that? Any information? I don't know if you heard the question or not.
Yes, I did hear.
Why don't you get to a mic so the rest of the world can hear us?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. Shields, Melissa. From my perspective, to answer your question, Mr. Duncan, is as follows. If you do the minimal renovations and you build a 100,000 square foot addition, that project would commence and then end by 2021. The square footage for that cost would be equal to if you built a new school, because that would also be the end date, 2021, and it would also be consistent with the fact for the first phase of your phased approach. So those numbers should be consistent because of the end date, based on interest rates and so forth. The first option of the minimal renovation and the addition precludes your economic development opportunity. because you're making a commitment in perpetuity to the 1960 or 53 building that's 65 years old. So if you're going down your pathway, if you make the decision that you renovate and put the addition on, then it precludes going forward with economic development discussion. There's not going to be any land for it. So then the question comes down to what drives the cost, Mr. Duncan, for the two-phase approach will be whatever the construction costs might be anticipated to be, as well as the interest rates starting in 2025, 2026. That's why there's an accelerator under the two-phase approach. When we were over, and Mr. Duncan joined us at Thomas Jefferson High School, a project that helped me here, Mr. Duncan, 7 years in the process. They caught the market coming right out of the recession where the competition was great in order to get quotes, to use them as a benchmark for what money they were able to get in the year 2010 and what money we can get now in terms of cost per foot is a false assumption. Many of you are going to join me on this Thursday because at George Marshall, they've undergone a tremendous renovation program. We should get a better cost then because that's more recent, Mr. Duncan. Would you agree? So we'll get a pretty good idea of what that will be. So in terms of the pathways that I would just reiterate is, one, we never know what the construction costs will come in. We don't know what the interest rates will be. We don't know how hungry the market will be. From my experience, if we structure an RFP in such a way that we open up the door for a variety of different types of construction materials, it gives to us and to the bidders some more latitude than just your typical one that you went out to before. For example, your gymnasiums do not need to be necessarily the same kind of construction as that of your academic area. So from the pathway that the board will discuss tomorrow night will be to what extent we can sharpen up the numbers for new construction or two-phase construction by looking at alternatives to the last RFP you went out for with the square footage. And I've been working those numbers over the weekend with Arcadis. And from the school perspective, you know, the board needs to focus on what is the educational needs that would be, and how would they be best met. I think, as I understand it, you as a city council have to determine go or no go with regard to some or full economic development. If you want no economic development at all, then one could consider the renovation, realizing you'll live with this old core school. Your guess is as good as mine as what money will cost to borrow in a year or two from now. This is the best money we're going to find for a long time. And your guess is as good as mine as what Arcadis is projecting out in terms of cost per footage when you go out for your bids. But I do think we can structure, as I've done in the past, RFPs in such a way that we can try to tap into a lot of creative and alternative RFP responses.
Okay, it's that last point that, thanks for that other information. I did gather from reading some of the online commentary that some people who were there Saturday didn't understand that the renovation on the current footprint option basically excludes any meaningful economic development. The Vice Mayor made that very clear in an online response to somebody who had that question. Let's just leave it at that. And I think that was an important learning to have occurred on Saturday. This is more the Dan Z question because this is not my area, but I'm looking at Jeff's. I was listening to you. I just wanted to call up Jeff's email. You know, he's got numbers for Marshall, TJ Science and Tech, Langley, West Springfield, and they're in the 161, 182, 183, 186 per square foot range for the costs associated with whatever changes they made. I'm not I haven't seen Marshall yet. Obviously, we've gone through TJ. And as we have spec'd out the numbers for option 5A, the build new, Jeff's letter says, the numbers are basically twice that. So I'm just asking that while you're talking to the school board and Arcadis, that some, alignment of, there are a lot of intelligent people in the city, and Jeff happens to be one of them, and not that he's, holy writ, but, that's a meaningful information, and I just would like to be able to tell the community, oh, well, ours is going to be a lot more for reasons, and here's the reasons. Or maybe it's not going to be that much more. And it's not related to whether we, build a gym with, 1,000 seats or 1,200 seats. It's related to what our construction costs are. And although we are small, we shouldn't be that much out of sync from what Fairfax is able to get, I would not hope. Anyway, that was my main question.
I guess I have a question. It's not just the size of us as a community and whatever bargaining power we have, but it's also the size of the school that we're talking about. Relative to the sizes of schools which they build in Fairfax County, what we're talking about doing, while it feels big for us, is actually small. And it's particularly small compared to the schools that you mentioned as having lower costs. And I wonder the extent to which the size of the school is influencing those per square foot costs.
So I think the bottom line question was, it sounds like our estimated costs are maybe, is it up to twice what some of these neighboring schools were on a per square foot basis? Do you have any insight to where that discrepancy comes from? Obviously, some of it is somebody coming out of recession.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're going to be significantly lower than...
I can speak nationally, and your journals that come across my desk all the time, and having worked all over the nation, it's remarkable to me in terms of the variation in square footage. What you'll get in the Midwest versus the South versus California versus here in Northern Virginia is stunning with regard to square footage. I was just looking at a magazine, a professional magazine. It came across my desk about a week or so ago, and you look at some of the schools that are being built in Iowa and other Midwest states, square footage. I'm intrigued by what Mr. Duncan has quoted there. But I think, as Ms. Oliver points out, and from my experience, is that there's sometimes an economy to scale at work. That the larger the project may be, and the footprint, and what you're looking to have done, oftentimes it's not the square footage base construction, as you know. A lot of it's the finishing of where the costs are. When I look at the budgets that have been put together for these projects, as well as for the last time you went up for RFP, how much do you build in there for your escalation and for your contingency and for your change orders? And I think a lot of times I know you save a lot of money down the road if you can do a very tight, specific RFP. You don't get into the change orders that will drive your costs significantly if you do it once. But all of the information that you've brought up this evening and other questions that we've gotten from the community, we have to fully explore. But as I see it, as Mr. Shields pointed out, there are two paths. The first path is you as a city in terms of the economic development or no-go for that, and how you develop your site use potential and who you would hire if you're going to have economic development, and the costs associated with that. That's not my bailiwick. And from the educational side, which is also the financial side, what is the nature of the school that the school board wants to recommend? And do you want to maintain that old school core footprint? Then it's just a matter of running the numbers when you want to go for 2 phases or a single phase, or drive down your costs and focus on the high school, if that's what your community can afford.
Mr. Snyder's had a question for a while. I want to let him go.
Thanks much. So I want to thank the small group that's worked on this, and I heard universal praise for the presentations and the work that was done in preparation, so thank you for that. I did hear, however, some expected a variety of views on how we move forward, and I want a little bit of time to understand the views and the questions that were asked. It is very true Mr. Acting Superintendent, that if you go with a renovation, you don't have economic development. It's also true you don't need so much economic development because the cost is lower. So it's important to understand not only the desires and the needs of the school and the different ways to meet those needs, but also the underlying financial realities of one option versus another. So while I heard overall some preference for the phasing approach and the new high school approach, I heard a lot of concern about the finances. I think there was a preference for the phasing approach based upon this theory that we build to the population. We see what we're actually going to get based upon the amount of land developed at that point, and it's possible that the population doesn't stay up with the predicted numbers. It's also possible that education theory would change dramatically and you wouldn't need the additional element, at least at that point. So I think from those that I talked to that prefer the phasing, it was out of some linkage of the finances to the needs and how you do this in time, and how much risk you're going to take. And I think, Mr. City Manager, I think you laid out in general terms what that was in various risks. So one of the questions is to tease out more on the financing. What would our Wall Street advisors say, for example, if we were to take on 95, even at the lower number, $95 million in debt? But keep in mind, we also have a CIP that would add on top of that. How much if you had the library and the city council?
About 30
To the city, not the city council. Yeah, we're no value there, but no, on the building. On
About
the building.
$30 million.
Extremely high long-term value there. Extremely high.
Oh, we have a very smart community, they know. So we're not going to value the city council, let's value the building. So we're talking about 30 million. So that's 125. And so did your charts when you showed the debt burden by individual and overall jurisdiction, did they show the total CIP program or what the schools would add? I'm trying to remember.
Those metrics on debt to assessed value and all those three metrics, those were for the full CIP.
Full CIP, including how much for the school?
The adopted CIP was 112 million, so that was the
So
number
it's
that was
112 million plus 30 million.
That's right.
So 142 million.
That's about right. Yeah.
Okay, so that's helpful to know that. And these are some numbers that I'd like to refine to get a better sense of, let's look at the finances for a minute, and let's do worst case. Let's say we don't get the economic development we really want and would advocate for right away, or we get a piece now and a piece later. We need to model, it seems to me, and part of understanding going forward, what are the true long-term costs? And another question was whether we included the increased operating costs in this. Now, I would think, on the one hand, the cost may go up. On the other hand, you're not dealing with maintaining an older building, as you said, a 60-year core. So that would be interesting to see how that played out. So I want to see a bit more on the exposure to the city of the different options over what period of time. What are the metrics that we should apply to this to understand? Because there are jurisdictions, even in our immediate area, that got themselves into serious difficulties by building too much too fast, and they didn't have a tax base that was willing to or able to support it. So I would like to see a bit more modeling on which option we go forward. What are the economic risks going forward? Then on the commercial development, the fact of the matter is we've already gained a lot of information. We heard from Mr. Novotny. But we also actually went out to the market. And so all those consulting fees, I don't think were wasted in the sense that we had a true market test and they responded back to us, this is what we're willing to do within this period of time, this is the amount of risk, this is what we're willing to pay you up front, and this is the amount of risk we'll share. So I would like us to bring some of that learning back into our thinking about commercial development. What do we need, where, and what if we don't get it? That's the kind of economic modeling that I think people want to see before we make a decision as to which of these avenues we go forward. because it would seem with the phasing, the initial risk is much lower than if you went with the whole school at the beginning. That is worst case. Now, we all want as much economic development as we can get to offset that. So this is the kind of additional questions that I'd like to dig into a bit more, and I think our citizens asked a number of questions along that line as well in order to make a truly informed decision right now. But I would like to bring some of the learning back into our current thinking that we picked up from the RFP process that we went through, because we actually did a real-world test. They actually told us how much they were willing to pay, and they also provided certain other projections and elements and time periods and willingness to take risk vis-a-vis the city. So I'd like to see a more thorough discussion of that before I want to go forward, because I want a school facility that works, but I don't want to bankrupt the city or run a serious risk of a downside that would undercut the financial ability of the city to continue indefinitely in the future.
Okay, Ms. Oliver.
So I just want to sort of respond to what Dr. Schiller said and to build on what Mr. Snyder said. I think the question before City Council is not economic development, but the question before City Council is affordability. And yes, economic development is an important piece of that. But the fundamental question is, what can we afford? One of the things I noticed is that all three options presented on Saturday do not comply with the current fiscal policy. The fiscal policy that many of you did not want to change because you said, we don't know if we'll need, and we don't want to assume we will break fiscal policy if we go forward with this project. And yet on Saturday, all three options were out of compliance. And the financial comparisons that you gave, and they may be the very best, very smart ones to have given, the financial comparisons you gave used a financing mechanism that is not authorized in the current financial policy. Now, that said, I think we all understand the areas in which we need to flex and the costs that are associated with that. You didn't put the cost of the unassigned fund balance on a per taxpayer basis, and that was a number that I think people maybe should have seen, in addition to what they were going to pay each year, what they were going to have to do for that. But at the end of the day, if we as a council say, nope, 40 is our limit, then the school board has to go figure out what they can do for 40. If we at the end of the day say, hey, school board, we can go to 90 if you give us 10 acres, or we can go to 90 if you give us 6 acres, that allows them to decide, but we're the ones that have to make that decision about the financing realities and the risk. And yes, we all know, and yes, the fun part of this, of financing this, will be working on whatever economic development we can get, but only if we've managed to afford it in the first place. So I think that's the more fundamental question.
Let me go back to the success of the last largest capital project we had, which was Mary Ellen Henderson School. We had a very good sense. We knew what we were getting. We had that sense. We also laid out very clearly for the community what the ramifications were, where we were going to get the money to cover it. And so that led to broad-based community support. I would like to go forward with a similar type of support for this project. And right now, I think there are some questions about what do these alternatives really mean in terms of financing, not just what I'm going to pay, that's obviously of concern to people, but also the long-term best interests of the city, and what can we realistically expect in what time period in terms of commercial development. So what is our financial risk? And let me just quote, I was looking for it. Here's a great quote from Lincoln's first inaugural. My countrymen, one and all, think calmly and well upon this whole subject. Nothing valuable can be lost by taking time. If there be an object to hurry any of you in hot haste to a step which you would never take deliberately, that object will be frustrated by taking time. no good object can be frustrated by it. I think an interesting comment, but in any event, I think we've made a lot of progress. I want to thank everybody involved.
Yes. Mary Beth Conley.
So now I think we're dipping into item 4 on the agenda here.
I think we've been in for a
We're
while.
well into 4 here.
Yeah.
What I'd like to propose is that the information that came out of Saturday's meeting, there are tons of comments. We have purple questions and we have colored comments, and I have little white sheets. And so there's tons of questions that people have asked. And I think the working group needs to get together this week. And we have the answers to almost all of those questions that came from what people learned on Saturday. So I think the working group needs to come up with a way to answer all those questions and lay it out there, not just say, all right, here's the answers, but continue to tell a story. Because I think what we saw on Saturday is that people responded to the story that we were able to lay out and the parameters that were in there. So we need to keep doing that with all due haste, not rush, but haste, to be able to say, here's the answers to your questions. And yes, that's a really good square foot question, and here's the answer, and we're going to lay it out. I think people really appreciated on Saturday that why it was so upfront about these are the expenses and these are the risks and these are the pluses and minuses. That really went a long way towards building community support for whatever decision we eventually make. So I think the working group has to go back in and start to answer those questions. Just like we started with our 23 questions, now we have a lot of other spin-offs that a lot of them are the same ones that we've already answered for ourselves that the community hasn't heard. But I think we need to make a commitment to answer those. And that will really help, I think.
So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just make one response. Ms. Oliver raises a very important question. If I have it correct in my mind, please let me know if I don't, that with the renovation and the addition, there are 0 acres. With one phase, by 2021, you get 10 acres. 2 phases, you get 5 acres in 2021, another 5, when and if you go for it. If you go for the second phase, then you get the same spot as if you built new up front, but you don't get it until 8 years later. So it's 0, 5, and 5, or 0, 5, 5, and 5, or 10.
Okay. So when are we going to have the output from that meeting? In other words, when and in what form is that going to be disseminated to the public?
I think after the meeting, everybody collapsed in exhaustion. So,
Superintendent,
what's that?
I was going to say, I've got a question too for you, just a minute if you don't mind.
So early, we want to get it out there quickly, the FAQ and a good synthesis of what was communicated and what we heard. And definitely by the end of this week, but as quickly as possible.
And that'll go up on the website as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, and FCC TV will have their video ready tomorrow. So that'll be up there tomorrow. And I just think, as I probably just said, we did such a nice job of distilling information and curating it and making it understandable to people on Saturday. We need to do the same thing with these questions. We can't just dump them all and have people try to find them. Where on the website might I answer some questions? We really need to make it so it's easy for people to get that information, understand it, ask further questions. So I think that's what the working group should be doing this week, yeah.
I have it's a small point, but I want to make it anyway to you. You'd mentioned before the idea of considering or reconsidering the school and whether it could be made either smaller or a little bit less ambitious to keep costs down a little bit. One point I just wanted to throw out to you, and I think you'd mentioned central office, whether it needed to be a part of a new school or not. We did do some analysis when we had the fiscal consultant here a period of time ago, comparing what we're paying in rent right now versus what we would save in rent versus the construction cost of building the facility. And we did an analysis that showed that it was pretty strongly leaning towards it would be better in the long run for us to include new central office because of the rent savings that we'd be saving on a yearly basis. So I just throw that out to you that when you're considering the school program, that you do that fiscal analysis or re-examine the analysis that we've done, because we are paying a pretty good amount of rent right now, and that could be saved. Of course, it would be offset by the capital cost of putting it there, but it may, that analysis showed earlier, at least 6 months ago, a year ago, that there was actually a good move to do that, so.
If I may, sir?
Yeah, of course.
To the point that is the 500-pound gorilla that's hanging over here, affordability. If this is about a high school, and you're going to have one shot at a referendum, the question is, in my judgment, do you want to crowd that referendum by putting in another $4 million that you will then amortize over 30 years, and put that as a question for the public contained within the high school question? Now, if it's affordability, every dollar, every bit of square footage is going to add to your cost. Second of all, with so many options that may be out there for other space, is it worth, when you go out for the referendum right now, to lock down that you're going to put a central office there in new construction when you haven't fully explored other places for that? And there's, what, 3 years left on the lease. I would just say that with all the places that I've worked and consulted for 45 years, I've seen more referendum going down about wanting to build schools, but then putting things into that were served as red herrings. Palm Beach County, 190,000 students, went after building 6 schools and a new central office in about 9 years ago, 10 years ago. The reason why it all failed is because of that Taj Mahal. And to this day, it's still reviewed as the central office at Taj Mahal. They had to go back. I've just seen it happen. I've seen it in my own districts when people start adding on and then lose sight of what the story is. I would suggest to you that if from an economic perspective, I can argue from a managerial perspective why it would not be there in the building. But if you want to argue in terms of, all right, it's cost efficient to build it, then if the public feels that way, put that on as a separate referendum. And see if they would vote for a separate referendum for a central office. Anyone want to take bets on that?
Could I
Go
just
ahead,
offer
Mr.
one
Dunn, sure, of
thought?
course.
From a managerial and cost-effective standpoint, I just remember that we are working on a couple other public buildings here too, and in terms of managerial efficiency and cost-effectiveness, I've always thought the city and schools administrative functions should be consolidated in one place, and we are getting ready to do City Hall, and this is just my personal opinion, but I would at least like the school board to discuss what you're bringing up, because I think you're making some very good points. I don't think we should be paying rent, and I don't think we want to get in the Taj Mahal business, but I think there's a third way that we could explore that the taxpayers would see as efficient and more effective, and would answer some of the concerns that we hear sometimes about duplicity of administrative functions.
If this is about building a high school, I completely agree with the superintendent. It would be contradictory to our purpose to throw in the business office. From a managerial perspective, when you put in a business central office on top of high school, that allows, if nothing else, the teachers in that facility to just run up and talk to the superintendent, bypass the principal. Maybe that's a good thing, get rid of a couple layers of principals and deputy principals. They could just work directly for the superintendent. This is why you don't want to have your business function embedded in a school. Not to mention the $4 million it would cost.
Well, what I would say is, if you look at it from a purely economic standpoint, the rent we're paying, I think, is approximately 10% of $4 million. It's $300 and something thousand a year. That's my understanding. And so,
$28,700 a month, yes.
what's that?
$28,700 a month. I checked that today.
Gotcha. And so you're at some point you're getting to almost a 10% return on your money, which is a really good use of money in some ways in terms of not using that anymore. In other words, that's a pretty penny to pay for something you could buy for $4 million, the stream of income of $350,000, $360,000 a year. I don't want to belabor the point. I guess I would just say to you, if you looked at it from a purely economic standpoint, I think there's some benefit to it. I'm not suggesting one way or the other, but just to keep that in your mind. And I think it's an analysis that should be considered
Sure, it's not
and
my
run.
decision to make, obviously. I'm just saying is that I know what my storyline would be, that if I was leading the charge to build a referendum to build a high school, it would be keep it simple. It's the high school, and not that we're adding on other things that people. The other day when we were there, this was about the high school campus project. It wasn't about, oh, by the way, it includes, the money includes the central office. I just, and I think that's the thing that have to be mindful of, is that all of the cost estimates that have been put out there for the working group and ever has included money for the central office.
Well, this goes along with the opportunity costs that we talked about before. You know, the previous superintendent said, I need 500 parking spaces for my teachers. And so what's the economic cost of providing 500 parking spaces of asphalt? The business office falls in the same category. It's already a cost we're paying here. There are plenty of other space in the city if you want to get something less expensive. We have plenty of Class B office spaces in the city. Let's move the business function into one of those places if you want to save some money. There are lots of options. We don't have to build them a brand new facility.
All right, let's go with Ms. Hardy, then Ms. Oliver.
I won't belabor the point on central office. I think I agree that it's just worth a second look, as well as other things I think you've mentioned in the past, Dr. Schiller, about, do we really need 3 gyms? Do we really need the MEH expansion, especially if George Mason will have capacity? So I think in general, the possibility of revising down the school program to really the essential things for the high school program itself is really a good exercise. So I look forward to hearing from that after tomorrow. I think it also just goes a long way to showing the community that we are serious about trying to make this project affordable. Because ultimately, whatever we decide, we want this to pass in referendum. And so I don't think we want to waste our time trying to throw everything in there in the kitchen sink, ultimately to have it fail. And so I think we all would love to see, the program possibly revised down. And
If the facility was revised down and hence the budget was reduced, it will then change the difference between the renovation addition and a new building, whether it be phased or at one time. And I think that's important to remember, because we're dealing with cost estimates of all in one, of all the things that have been considered. But if you scale back some of these, then all the costs will be then brought, I hate to use the word more affordable, but it will be scaled back. My biggest concern for you all going forward in the future is, as any of us who have ever been involved with the renovation of a home or a business or whatever, is to what extent do you invest into a 65-year-old building? And the way the money is that we put the budget together, those are minimal renovations. What will you find when you open up the place, and what will you need 5 years, 10 years, 30 years from now? That's the tough question that I would lose a lot of sleep over, because we know as energy, it's not just that we want it to look prettier. Is energy inefficient? And then if you start adding on more renovation, we looked at all those options with the gut renovations and expanded renovations, how much more will that be as opposed to something new, whether it be in 2 phases or 1?
Ms. Oliver?
So when you were talking about the choices, you were talking about the acreage available for economic development. But that still is not the fundamental question. The fundamental question that we as council have to decide is how much can we put on the tax rate? And it's a range, and there may be different appetite if we're building a whole brand new building versus doing a renovation. But the question we need to first understand is, what can we put on this tax rate, and what will that get us in borrowing capacity? How much of a construction budget do we get for that? And we have talked about using alternative strategies to stretch it. Our question is the affordability. If we say to the school board, all we can do is a $65 million budget. The school board gets to go and say, we're going to phase it, we're going to renovate it, we're going to try to whittle 112 down to 65. Maybe we're going to come back and go, hey guys, give us 80 and we can do it. Like, I don't think that we would ever get to that. I think that would be a big enough gap. But we have to first indicate how much risk are we willing to take on. And obviously, the risk is contingent upon the economic development that might in the future give us a little flexibility. But we have to know right now, how much can we take on now? And I, for one, I'm willing to consider the value of the land that we'll get as a sale or a lease at some unknown time. And I think that we can balance that against our construction budget. But the ongoing economic development is so far out into the future, and if you think about it, it's going to have to go to cover the higher operating costs from the growth in enrollment. So, you know, when I think about what we can afford, I'm willing to consider the value of the land. I myself am not willing to risk the affordability question on the future revenue streams, because I think those have other needs if they exist. Do I think we need economic development? I do. And so I think our direction to the school board needs to include you have to free up land. And we may go out to the community in the future and decide, you know what, that skating rink, it's worth more than the economic development to our community. I don't personally see it, but that could be the decision. So I think it's absolutely critical that the path forward free up some land, but I think we need to be very clear about what we can afford to borrow right now. And whether or not we are prepared to take the risk that would allow new construction to go forward.
Well, one of the things that I think we could do, and just lay it out as clearly as we can, just do some best case scenarios and do some worst case scenarios, and just build in some scenarios of a 3-year lag on the economic development, interest rates, you know, way above what we're presenting. Just pick a couple of them so we're not running every option under the sun, but try to provide a bit more of a worst case scenario. And I think that really then gives you a clearer picture as to what the tax rate implication. You know, I guess under the 117 million one phase, the worst case scenario as it was presented on Saturday afternoon was all 16 cents needs to be picked up by the taxpayer, because none of the economic development happens. It all gets delayed. But we can provide probably a few more gradations on that, and I think that probably would be helpful. More sensitivity analysis.
At least for me, what also would be helpful would be what the mayor and others have referred to, which is, you know, a group of people who are applying the same kind of effort that has been applied to the question about the school program to the economic development effort. I mean, Mr. Snyder's right. You know, we did hear from the market. It's been a little while, but we have some information to work with. I mean, you know, there are other ways to finance things besides, you know, raising your taxes right now. I mean, I just came back from Knoxville. They're, you know, filling in a long vacant gap in the downtown with a 10-story condominium building, luxury condominium building that's got underground parking, and the financing is supported through tax increment methods. So, you know, they're making a vacant space bloom with a strategy that, you know, basically is going to draw from the revenue that the building itself will generate. I'm not saying that that's the way we want to go here, but there are obviously other ways to do things that the community needs to understand. I don't even think the community needs to understand all those things necessarily before we decide to go to referendum, because you do have, as you said, somebody said, we got the summer, got the fall, you know, we can continue to have a dialogue with people, but I do think we ought to begin the process of a team that would look at the economic development aspects of it and be ready to present something, you know, or at least some range of options when we really focus on the referendum around Labor Day.
So, City Manager, remind us again when we have to submit the question to have a November referendum?
90 days before the election. So ideally, that would be the second meeting in July. And then that allows the city attorney 10 days or so, or 15 days to get it to the judge and order.
So as a practical matter, Ms. Oliver, I'm sure, would agree with me. Whoever is up for election this November will get beaten up if we decide to make these decisions when everyone is on summer vacation. So as a practical matter, we're probably talking by Memorial Day, if you're going to put it this November.
What we've traditionally done is you've got in hand a guaranteed maximum price before you put a number on the ballot. I don't think that's possible on Memorial Day. I understand what you're saying. I'm just worried about being able to hit that deadline.
I think we're in strong agreement here.
Okay. We're making the same point. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, how long does it take to, if we were to go the RFP route? Is it 90 days but from the time you issue an RFP till you get responses?
No, it doesn't have to be 90 days. It could be shorter than that. And you can have it in 2 phases also, where you could ask for the conceptual plans, so hopefully you get a big pool of respondents. This is not like the last process where we're trying to get them to do everything for us. This is really just a traditional school procurement. So we usually get 9 responses, get a healthy response. And then you shortlist those down, and then you go through the detailed phase. So with those 2 steps, that's why hitting that July date is, the decision needs to be made soon if we're going to hit that July date. We need to. So
that's my question. What is soon? Like, do we need to, by March 1st, be able to issue an RFP?
I think you're saying last week.
Yeah, or do we need to by February 15th?
That's a question really for the schools who are going to run that procurement, but we need to get that information to you ASAP, because we just need to work it backwards.
So I'm just wondering how long we have to gather the information from Saturday's session and share it with the community and get some more feedback and answer all these questions. Do we have 2 weeks? Do we have 3 weeks? I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Okay, other comments? Or are we done for the moment? Okay. Okay.
I think the other consideration for timing of this is how it relates to the budget season. So if we make a decision, are there things that we need to consider in the FY18 budget, in which case we should make a decision before April? Especially if we need to start saving pennies, for example, in capital reserves, right? Just another reason to make sure that it seems like March, frankly, is kind of the timeline that we need to make a decision. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Well, the typical RFP for something like this is even a 2-stage RFP is at least 60 days, I think, right? So 15 and 45, it's the quickest you can get it done.
That's right.
Okay, I mean, at least we've had some discussion. The ball is moving slowly, at least tonight. But we will continue this dialogue and hopefully get together with our school colleagues coming up here soon as well to share their thoughts and insights. Mr. Snyder?
Just before we part, I would ask the city manager to get us some additional input from some of the bond experts about, how much should a city our size take on, not just in comparison, but I'd like to get some more expert opinion, which you can probably get from bond counsel that we've used before without paying for it too much. So,
And we will start with that, and we've asked that question many times. So we have some older reports that try to get at that question. Let me ask the council, in terms of the budget amendment that's before you, we do, so we're 175K over, which makes us uncomfortable. What if we were to bring forward a $250,000, which means there's another 75K, and that will get us through, I think, for a decent period of time, and over that period of time we can also develop a fuller budget. Would council be comfortable with that on the agenda for Monday night? So instead of the 500K, basically a 250K addition.
I like 200 and the council decides to make a decision so that we can then do the other number realistically.
Yeah, 250 is high for me. I'd like it to be, 200 I think is closer. I personally like to be lower than that, but I guess if that's the consensus. 200 would. All right.
175.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Sorry, I just wanted to really quickly, I had asked a question about whether people feel like they're ready to make a decision, and I heard 3 people answer it. And I didn't hear Mr. Snyder, Mr. Tarter, or Mr. Duncan answer it.
Thank you, I will. I asked a series of questions tonight, and I'll be very anxious to get those answers and proceed to move on accordingly. I want to move on this as much as anybody does, but I want to make sure that we do so prudently, and I think that's something we all share. So, thanks.
If I'm supposed to answer, I just wanted a chance to talk with folks about their personal impressions of Saturday. I couldn't really get a total feel. I mean, from what I saw, it seemed like we were on a track to move ahead. I think it's well known that, I'm one of those old men in a hurry types, but, I think Mr. Snyder's right. We want to do it the right way. I do think it's possible I think we need to keep everybody focused on this, and I think we are going to have to deal with the reality that people are going to have to pay attention all the way up to through summer. Which is a bit of a different thing, but, building a high school for the first time in 64 years is a bit of a different thing.
Yeah, I think we're very close. I mean, for me, I know people have kind of discounted the idea of really delving into economic development as if it's sort of tangential to what we're talking about, but I think it really, a greater information about it will lead to better decisions and risk mitigation and some maybe exciting things for this city as a whole that go beyond this campus site. And so I think we really ought to be spending more time now talking about economic development, what we might do there, how it can benefit the city as a whole, create a sense of place for our community, a greater sense of place. And so I would really hope that we can find a way to really delve into that with both feet in the very near future. I think it's important for the whole project and will help mitigate risk and help us make better decisions, frankly, with information about what we want to do. And frankly, get input from our community as well. I think we've heard from a lot of folks who don't really want, quote, more of the same. They'd like to do something special, something different here. And I'd like to be able to sort of truth test that, get some more information about what people do want to see up there. And we have an opportunity to create something special. I don't want us to not spend the time we need on that. So I think there's some exciting things we can do that'll be different. There's been some discussion maybe of a hotel that has some convention space. I think that would be something that the city doesn't have that could be exciting to have. So anyway, I really do want to delve in with obviously the consensus of our group and the schools as well, more in economic development that will help me make a better decision. So anyway, anything else to be said tonight?
All right.
Want to go ahead?
Remove to adjourn.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Second.